I love talking about history in bars, but normally I've found that people want to shut me up rather than extend the conversation. But in this case, I think we have something very historical to talk about, and that's the actual wreath laying itself, which was founded by alumni on the 100th anniversary of Peter Cooper's birth, and we reenacted it today. But I found it kind of very odd to think of it in historical terms, because I was not quite sure if Peter Cooper was supposed to be buried underneath that, what is essentially a mausoleum. If it was Grant's tomb, we know where Grant is. But there's a way in which the whole park is set up in a very unusual way. It's, I think, the only park in New York which is dedicated to a New Yorker and has a memorial statue in it, where, as it were, Peter Cooper himself owns that land in perpetuity. So it's somehow strange to think that here's someone who is not a military hero and would never held major elective office, even though he ran for president and got, I think, 1.5% of the vote, the popular vote, but we don't care about the popular vote anymore. But you know, their New Yorkers had literally given their hard-earned cash to produce that monument. Indeed, they gave so much money, way over the $40,000 that was required, that they actually could redecorate and re-sculpture the park with the additional cash. So I have a question for you. Yes. That is, when you put the wreath on the statue, did you feel the spirit of Peter Cooper?
I have to say, I did feel something. You know, I wasn't quite sure how it was going to go. I was kind of nervous about putting it up there because I really didn't want my first wreath laying to drop the wreath. And I don't know, for those of you who haven't been to one, we have to put it quite high up. So I was relieved that Bill May, who, as you know, has been an extraordinary leader within this institution in so many ways, was there to help me lead today, because he added height to the equation. But it was, you know, I wasn't quite sure what to expect, and it was actually pretty extraordinary to lift this piece up to him, and then to sort of see it resting there. And what was particularly moving then was the spontaneous I think, applause and singing happy birthday to Peter Cooper. But it was just an incredible moment, because it is this time, I mean, there's so few times in life when we pause today. Everything is moving so quickly, and we have so much to get done, and we fill our days doing kind of the next thing. And here we were on, you know, an otherwise kind of gloomy day with a lot of people just taking a moment out of their day to reflect on something that is this important. And it was it's particularly important now, I think. Where, as I said this afternoon, for those of you who weren't there, this is a particularly important moment in our history as an institution and as a community. And so to be able to have moments like this afternoon and tonight where we can be together to reflect on Peter Cooper's legacy and to begin to think about what that legacy means for us going forward was, I think, a pretty extraordinary moment.
I always love that wreath laying moment, as if we're somehow giving birth again to Peter Cooper's spirit. But I suppose the question has to be, for an incoming president, how do we keep that spirit going? In some sense, the high point for the city was the moment that Peter Cooper died, or the day after Peter Cooper died. Well, that doesn't sound right. But you know, the mayor directed that all public offices be closed, that all the ships in the harbour, if they were coming into port, had to lower their flags to half-mast. An extraordinary outpouring of affection for, again, someone who was not a military hero, or he somehow encapsulated, as it were, the benevolence of the city itself. And so the city had to stop the moment he died. which I find incredible, again, to think that this is not anything that's ever been accorded to anybody else in the city who's been, as it was, a native New Yorker.
Well, you know, I think he represented so many things that I find so many people can really connect with the man, the spirit, the legacy. And he represented, I think, so much of what the American dream has been about. He was an entrepreneur. He didn't have formal education himself. He didn't have resources to start with. And he built it himself. And he failed many times, right? He was creative. He would try things. He would invent things. He would fail. He would stop, reflect, restart, and keep going until he made something a success. And I think, you know, that's something that so many of us really want. Mm-hmm. So he had this this resilience and this fortitude to keep going, this perseverance. He also was willing to and able to kind of reflect on the things that he didn't have. So he didn't have a formal education, and sometimes, you know, sometimes there can be this natural tendency, if I didn't have it, I don't want others to either. And he represented the complete opposite. He recognized the value that an education could have had on his life and could have for other people, and then left this extraordinary gift to make it happen.
I was reading over some of the sermons given that Sunday after he died, because pretty well every church, regardless of the denomination, gave over the Sunday sermons to the Peter Cooper. And a word that was used was benevolence. And I wondered if you thought that was an operative word anymore.
Anymore?
Yeah.
You know, I think it's there. I think we have been challenged of late to wonder, and I think what we've seen actually in the last few weeks has been a spirit of benevolence and a spirit of connectedness that is often what is required of benevolence. So do I think it's missing sometimes in our society? Yes. And I have spent a lot of time sort of thinking about what it means to be benevolent in a capitalist society, what it means to be benevolent in a society that is about kind of achievement and getting ahead. But I think at our core, it's still very much there, and I think we've seen the connectedness that can lead to benevolence in the last few weeks.
That's good to hear. I mean, I always like to think that 19th century words can be reactivated, because I'm a 19th century historian. But I think that it's kind of telling that a particular language of giving that once was instrumental in producing urban institutions has somehow disappeared. Or am I imagining it? Because you must have experience in Philadelphia of trying to link, as it were, cash to location.
Yes. You know what, I have found in philanthropy anyway, that cash to location actually resonates more with people sometimes than cash to issue. It depends on the giver, but I think that can be the case. And in many ways, it's about helping people who have the capacity to give to be connected to that place. Because I think at the end of the day, people still really value and crave connection.
Right.
I think that the ways in which people want to give have evolved. And that's very much the case in philanthropy. And you know, as we begin to think about our path forward together, we need to really think about that and think about the ways in which people might want to engage with our community, our institution. People who have the capacity to give in big ways these days really want to see a connection to their personal interests and want to give in more ways than beyond their wallet. So many people are interested in giving financially, and they want to be a part of helping to shape the future of what their resources can be invested in.
So has your experience been then that in some sense place is still instrumental? I mean, the oddity about Cooper Union, if you think about it in terms of other institutions, is we've never shifted location. Columbia has moved 3 times since the 1850s, and we're still here. There was a brief moment at which we thought of opening a second campus up at Sterling Forest, where IBM was developing a research site, but that was a moment that lasted about 2 years. So you think there's, as it were, traction in locality. So then, how do we engage the city? Because at one point the city adopted our founder. Does this make any sense of the question?
Yes, I think there are tremendous ways in which we can engage our city. I think we already do it on some level. We have wonderful outreach programs that connect others to us and that give us a platform for connecting to them. I also think we have this amazing asset in the basement of the foundation building called the Great Hall. And what's extraordinary to me about the Great Hall is the way in which Peter Cooper envisioned how it could be used. He was a very political person, as you mentioned. I'm sure when he ran for president, he didn't expect to win, but he thought there was value in running.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
There was value in the statements that he wanted to make. There was value in developing a platform to be able to talk about positions and values that he felt were important for the country. And when he built the school and when he built the building, he specifically had in mind this idea that this institution could and should be a hub of public discourse. Yeah. That it could be a place where people could gather and hear and engage with leading voices, and by leading I don't necessarily mean the most famous of the time, but people who were on the leading edge of new ideas that could advance this country in a positive way. And the idea that he would meld that with a school was just extraordinary. And I can't, in some ways, think of a more relevant combination for today, given where we are as a society, than that combination. And I think if we can think about the ways in which we activate the Great Hall to achieve that mission in a way that is relevant for today, that would be an extraordinary gift to New York City, to the country, and beyond.
Right. I mean, I think Cooper really believed in democracy, which is actually kind of hard to do after the recent presidential election. There's been a lot of odd statements about the dangers of democracy, which we haven't heard since the mid-19th century. But Cooper was well-nigh spiritual in his belief in democracy. He even believed that students should govern themselves, and that's obviously a spiritual quest. As a deliberative assemblies, I wondered if there's still room for that. I mean, what he really wanted to do, I think, was to teach people how to run a good meeting. I don't mean this kind of in the small scale, that somehow deliberative assembly would actually cure America's problems, because it's all that America really had to differentiate itself from the rest of the world. But how do you tap that culture? Do you think there's still an interest in democratic process? I don't want to be too cynical about this, but...
Yeah, well, I'm a glasses half full kind of person. And I believe there's an interest in it, and perhaps more importantly, I believe that we have a responsibility to ensure that those founding principles stay alive. And I think even as we speak, or maybe just wrapping up, democracy is in action tonight as the Ninth Circuit listens to arguments on the most recent executive order. So what I think is really important as we think about the role of democracy going forward is ensuring that we have public platforms for debate and for rigorous debate. And I think we can be a model for that. And I hope that through our own process of looking at our path forward as an institution, and by the kinds of public speeches and speakers that we bring to our institution to share with others, that we can model a way forward on this front, that we can model that it is possible, and not only possible, but optimal, to create a platform in which many views can be heard. You know, certain ground rules, like you know, fact-based views and views that are not and views that are not you know, that are not hate-based, that are respectful. But with those, I think, pretty basic requirements, on any complex issue, there are and should be a wide variety of views, and I hope that we can be a platform for shining light on the fact that people can have passionate and reasoned conversation that helps to move an issue forward, and that we only get to a strong place by having that kind of debate. So I think that we can model that. I hope that we can model that. I'm committed to modeling.
Great. Yes. I mean, I've got an anecdote here which kind of rewrites history. Which, that is, we're always very happy about the fact that Abraham Lincoln gave his Right Makes Might speech in the Great Hall, and it was Lincoln's own estimate that that speech propelled him to be the Republican candidate and well nigh guaranteed the Civil War. But it was Cooper's hope that the first event in the Great Hall was that he was going to invite every senator into the Great Hall, where they would be sat down by our founder and told to debate seriously and avoid the Civil War. So that, in fact, Cooper Union caused the Civil War rather than avoiding it. But the even better part, of course, is that Abraham Lincoln didn't come here because of us. It was the Young Republican Association rented the hall, so he actually got cash for causing the Civil War. That's what I told my students.
I just think I'm going to put it in the plan.
Yeah. But I think there's so much. I think there's so much. You're right that we can engage the old history to talk about what we can do in more active ways to encourage citizenship in the city. And I can speak personally, is that I used to think history was a pretty interesting but largely quiet-ish kind of endeavor. But there was nothing like the last 4 years.
You're arguing that Abe Lincoln was a mercenary?
No, I'm. But actually, the struggle over Cooper Union's history is a struggle over its future, which is very strange because, you know, I started what I think is still the correct paper, saying that I've never found any evidence that Peter Cooper set us free as air and water. And this was taken as a particular kind of a reason to jettison the whole idea. So one has to be kind of very careful about what history one advances, because especially in an institution which is now very old by American standards, that history is not just a matter of original intent. We're never going to get there, but is a matter of active practice, and that's what I think we've got to concentrate on.
So well said. Great.